Welcome to Lights Out. I'm John Weiss,
I'm Andy Henderson.
and today we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, Andy. We're going to talk about smart connected devices. We're going to talk about tracking devices, robots, maybe some other stuff. Any idea what these have to do with manufacturing?
Uh, People make them.
People make them, but largely they're consumer products and things that are not typically used in manufacturing environments. And I want to get your
Yeah.
take on how we can actually use them in manufacturing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's actually have some experience using these little tile tags to track high value assets or high value components around in a large factory.
Perfect. So in the consumer world, most people would know these. I think a couple of years ago they had some commercials, right? You'd put them on your keychain. Dad can't find his car keys. Mom can't find her purse. Whatever. Oh no, let's pull up the iPhone and see where it is in the house, right? That's the consumer version of the tile. But to your point, maybe it can be used in manufacturing environments.
Yeah, the attractive thing for us was that it would interact with people's smartphones, and everybody had a smartphone. And these tags were, I can't remember the cost. I'm going to say 20 some odd dollars. I don't quote me, but you could if you had a crate of product that you wanted to um, know where it was at any time, you drop one of these tags on it, or you stick it in just inside the crate, and as people with smartphones and the app walk by, it logs their position and registers the fact that they passed by the tag. And so when you go to look it up later, it has this log of where it's been and who's walked by it, but you know where it's been. So it's could be a really low cost way of getting some visibility to where products are. And most people would say that that's, if you don't know where your products are, then you've got other problems to solve. And true, but there's also reality, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I would argue not so true, actually. If you've been to some of the warehouses that probably you and I have both been to, uh, these are not small warehouses, right? Some of these can span, you know, hundreds of thousands of square feet, quite literally, in multiple buildings. I've been to locations, aerospace manufacturers that are both sides of the street, right? And they can't find forklifts. That sometimes they don't even know where parts of the airplane are, and they're huge, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, for sure, it's a big deal. I know I'm familiar with high value parts, crates of high value parts being moved outside, and then when somebody needs to get to something behind it, they move it somewhere else outside. And so after two or three of these moves, people lose track of where they are. And so yeah, it can be a big deal. It seems like a silly thing that people should be able to have control over, but
Most people don't realize that it's not always so easy to find stuff in these big factories and warehouses. I just mentioned aerospace, and it comes to mind. So I had heard of a use case, actually very similar to yours around tracking tools, but it was for safety purposes. It was this story that I heard. There was an aerospace manufacturer that had run into a problem during testing where they fired up a jet engine, and somebody had actually left a hand drill inside of the one of the components of this engine, and when they fired it up, it basically just obliterated the engine. Um,
Mhm.
and as a result, they had implemented this exact type of use case where they used BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy trackers, on carts. So each cart had a beacon, and all of the tools on the cart had tags, and they
uh,
were notified every day if all of the tools in real time, right?
yeah.
If any of the tools were not back on the cart that they belonged in, to make sure that no one left any parts in fuselage or any part of the aircraft that could potentially be catastrophic.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. You can buy these little temperature. They're like tiles, is what they are, right? These little $50 temperature things, and you can connect a whole bunch of them to a wireless hub, and uh, you could put them on different objects, say in a manufacturing plant, and let them monitor the temperatures wherever they're located. And if the temperature starts to rise on say a motor, then that's a good indication that there's something wrong. Maybe that motor needs some maintenance or it needs to be checked on. And the real and then like if you want to step it up, there are the thermal cameras, and this was an actual use case that I was loosely a part of, where one of my colleagues put up thermal cameras facing at a bunch of motors and saw a temperature rise on one of them, and went out to inspect it and noticed that there was a nice little dent in the shroud over the fan on that motor, where it was pretty obvious that a fork truck had accidentally backed into it, dented the shroud. That shroud broke a bunch of the fan blades, and therefore the motor was getting hotter than it needed to be. And if left unchecked, right, and it would have been left unchecked because nobody would have known about it otherwise. If left unchecked, it would have failed that motor at some point unexpectedly, and they would have had to rush to replace it. So
that's no joke, by the way, right? An overheated asset. I mean, that's it can be a fire hazard. I mean, those things can combust if that engine is cranking away and it's not getting cooled. So that's not just an unplanned downtime event, right? I mean, that's got the potential to be pretty disastrous.
It certainly can be. Absolutely right. So the point there is, like, if you go and type in wireless temperature sensors on Google, and they're all 50 to 60 bucks, and they all integrate with like either a wireless hub or directly with a smartphone. And why not? If you think if you have some high value assets and you think that that the temperature that could be a low cost solution to monitoring those assets over time. And then, like I said, if you want to step it up, thermal cameras are cool, and really you can get those for a couple $100. Maybe the full system would cost a few thousand to put a full system in, but could be well worth its cost.
Yeah, definitely, especially today, right? Thermal cameras. It's not just assets that we're monitoring with thermal cameras; it's people too.
Could be people too.
Yeah, interesting.
So, John, robotics are extremely important for manufacturing. We know that, but what do you know of any other types of robots other than the quintessential robotic arm that everybody thinks of?
Yeah, definitely. You're right, spot on. I think when you say robotics and manufacturing in the same sentence or paragraph, people automatically think of an arm, picking something up, moving it around, dropping it, something like that, right? That's what I do. But one of my favorite new ones, if you will, or newer ones, it's actually in more of a supply chain use case, and it's these warehouse fulfillment robots that Amazon uses. If you haven't seen these, really cool. They're basically like larger Roomba vacuum looking things that are going out in like swarms throughout the warehouses. And what they do is they pull right under a really large rack of inventory, and the middle component lifts up to lift the rack off the ground, and then they go and drive it around like R2D2, right? It's really cool. And the whole purpose, the use case, is that they've greatly increased efficiency in the warehouses because they no longer have employees walking around aisles and aisles and aisles of parts and components, what have you, right? Products. They stay still. So the fulfillment employees actually stay still in one place behind a very nice safe cage. And basically the robots will bring the inventory racks right to them. They pick the part that they need from the bin, put it in their box, and the next robot comes with the next bin and the next piece. So it's, to me, that's a really cool use case. How about you?
Yeah, I love to poke around on, I'll drop Disney's name, Disney Research, their website. They do some really impressive research on a whole bunch of topics, and robotics is one of them. One of the cooler things that I saw recently was it was a kind of a humanoid looking robot handing, or a person would hand an object to this robot, and the research was all about what's the right speed and the right way for the robot to basically grab this and take it from the human. So how do you? So we as people do this all the time and don't ever think much about it. But it's a really interesting question of how do you teach a robot to do it? There's a lot going on in there in terms of tracking the object. So the researcher hands the object and then he moves it at the last second, and the robot has to follow it up. And it was the part of the research was around how fast should the robot respond. So the human presents it. If the robot is too slow, how does that make the person? What does it feel like to the person in terms of being like discomforting? Or if it's too fast, is it discomforting? And there's also like the haptic feedback of the robot. This is a big deal, right? It's very hard for robots to have some sort of haptic response. So like picking up soft things is a really challenging problem for a robot. But and this wasn't a soft object. I don't mean to be misleading in that way, but what it was the researcher would present the object to the robot, and then when the robot would grasp it, it would pull back on it, and the robot would hold on, and then eventually the researcher would let it go, and the robot would take it. But it's really cool. And so, what does this mean for manufacturing? I digress. What does it mean for manufacturing? When we think about cobots, that's a big deal, right? We think about the Rethink Robotics. We've got Baxter, and the reason cobots are nice is because people can work alongside them. It's fairly easy to train them. They can do tasks, and people can work in the same area because they're safe to be around humans. Well, what if you could use some of this technology because to aid in that process, in that human robot interaction? So instead of a human doing a task and then putting the object down and letting it go down some conveyor belt to the robot to do something, if the human could do a part of the task and just hand it directly to the robot, or use the robot to help it do some sort of task, who knows, right? It's really interesting, especially when we start thinking about human robot interactions and how cobots have really played a important role in manufacturing in the recent years.
Sounds to me like it's the first step toward, like you said, the real human robot interaction, right? This is what gets us to the point where you're holding one side of a spindle, the robot's holding the other side of a big spindle, and together you're doing some kind of joint lift to put something in place, right? Or why I'm picking a spindle, I don't know. But you get the point, right? Like this is what aids that whole human machine interaction, handing the robot a screwdriver, right? Versus having to put it down, step away so no one gets hurt while the thing tries to pick up the screwdriver, right? So to me, that's fascinating. And think about, not just for manufacturing, but think about all of the physics and all of the things that have to go into these models that they're creating so that on the fly, these robots can figure out how much tension do I pull back, to your example, where the researchers applying some pressure, not letting go right away, but then they do let go, right? How complex do those models have to be so that the robot doesn't just fall, straight backwards onto the floor or something like that? Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. The other thing that I like, Andy, which maybe weird for manufacturing, but I like my smart security cameras and doorbells. I like to see when my packages get delivered. I get lots of stuff from Amazon, lots of little toys and things, and I get really excited. I want to go get them as soon as they get here, right? That's really why I have the doorbell. It's not so much for security. It's so I know that I got a package. And prior to this work from home environment that we're in, it was also nice to know when people were there, if you missed a delivery, something like that. But now we're all kind of home, and it's a little bit less effective in the consumer world in some respects. But What's interesting to me are some of the applications that can be applied in the industrial world with this type of technology. Think of it, to me, it's not so much about a doorbell, it's more about proximity activated video analytics, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So the first use case that comes to my mind, back to supply chain, actually, I'm thinking that this could be really useful for knowing exactly when a truck arrives in a fulfillment center, in a warehouse. When it's pulling up to the bay, you get your push notification on your smartwatch. If you're not in the warehouse area to go help load the truck, you know, oh, okay, it's this vehicle because I can see it. And they're backing up right now. I better go help out, right? Just that kind of use case, to me, I could see that increasing efficiency a lot in a warehouse.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've seen done before is taking one of those outdoor security cameras and putting it inside a machining center. And reason being is it's nice to have the video of what's going on during the machining process anyway.
Yeah.
But also those security cameras, to your point, there will be time markers in the video where there's some other motion, something else comes into the view and leaves the view. And it's nice to know, like if you're thinking about a lean Kaizen event where you're trying to optimize a process, being able to have the video with the time record and have the markers on the timeline for when a person comes in, when a person leaves. It's really useful for trying to say, how do we improve that particular operation? How do we cut down on some of the steps and maybe cut cycle time out so that we can make our products faster and cheaper? And the outdoor part is nice because those cameras are built to be outside in the rain, so they have like weatherproof housings on them.
Yeah.
And inside of a machining center specifically, there's a lot of fluids and things splashing around. So it's really a more straightforward use than we might think, but it's a good one.
I had heard of a very similar use case in the exact opposite of machining, an additive. And I had heard the exact same use case, funny enough, that in additive, they're looking at doing the same thing because it's really difficult to know if your job that's being run is actually containing any quality defects until the job is done, right? And the problem with additive, it can take a really long time if you're making a large part. If you're fabricating something pretty large, and let's say it takes 8 hours to build a piece, right? Imagine waiting the entire 8 hours to get your piece to find out at the very base you had a quality defect and you can't use the part. That's like 7 hours potentially of wasted time and materials, right? So I had heard of the same use case where they're putting these right in the 3D printing chambers in those machines and using video analytics on that video feed to make a determination of if there is a quality defect so they can stop the job immediately, not waste all the time and materials. Pretty interesting.
For sure. And you know, another kind of different use case would there in many manufacturing environments, the associates will badge in, or they'll do something when they arrive at the workstation to show that they're there, and then work instructions will be presented to them, that sort of thing. So why not use, you know, it might be a touchy subject to some people, but usually the Ring, like a doorbell camera, when they walk up, it push the button that registers, and then it does a facial recognition on them to know that they're there. And then there might have to be some software adaptations. I've never used it myself to know for sure, but it seems like maybe there's a straightforward use case there. I don't know if there's an API that somebody could interface with to make it work. But hey, could it be a lower barrier of entry than other types of systems?
Maybe. I think even in its simplest form, just being able to detect motion when somebody approaches as a proximity sensor, it's nice to have the video because you know that it's a it's somebody that's supposed to be there with the proper PPE and they should be using the
Yeah.
machine. Maybe that's a use case right there, Andy. Right? Maybe it checks for PPE, and if you don't have the appropriate PPE on, it doesn't start the machine.
Yeah. And in the world of the pandemic, I've heard, I forget who it was. There was a company using video to make sure that people were properly spacing apart. So using these same types of camera systems to make sure people are adhering to social distance.
Yeah, there are so many. We're getting now more and more down the computer vision use case path, I
Yeah.
think, and there are so many great computer vision use cases. I remember years ago hearing about one of the automotive manufacturers that was using computer vision to detect employee ergonomics to make sure folks on the line, one specific place in the door assembly process where the folks had to lift door panels that are pretty heavy, right? They were
Mm-hmm.
actually running video analytics to make sure that people were lifting, bending with the knees, not the back, lifting appropriately.
Nice.
And they would be flagged in real time if somebody did an overextension of the back or
Oh,
did any
cool.
kind of maneuver that would result in a back injury so that they could address it right now before an employee got hurt.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a really good one.
Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Well, as always, Andy, this has been a lot of fun. I do think we're out of time. I would love to hear from the audience, as I'm sure you would too. If anybody has any ideas for cool new technologies in the consumer space or any other space outside of industry, we'd love to kind of think about it and figure out how could we actually apply it in the industrial setting. So if you've got any ideas, drop us a comment, like and subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. But until next time, we'll see you.
Thanks. See ya.